There are loves that never die. They just wait for the right moment to come back and set everything on fire again. Arthur thought he had buried the past along with the ashes of his first love. But when he opened that classroom door and saw her standing there with those eyes impossible to forget, his world shook. Lynn, the woman who left without explanations, the only one his body never forgot. And now, she was back, teaching his daughter. If you believe in loves that defy time, subscribe to the channel and leave your like, because stories like this deserve to be shared. Comment where you're listening to this story from and let me know, do you believe in second chances? Your support helps us keep bringing stories that touch the soul. The morning air carried the scent of wet chalk and recent rain as Arthur Collins guided his daughter through the narrow hallways of the elementary school. His hand rested gently on Emma's small shoulder, feeling the nervous energy radiating from her 5-year-old body. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered slightly, casting soft shadows against the pale yellow walls, adorned with colorful drawings of alphabets and smiling suns. "Daddy, what if the teacher doesn't like me?" Emma's voice trembled, her fingers gripping the straps of her pink backpack. Arthur knelt down, his knees pressing against the cold linoleum floor. He brushed a honey-colored strand of hair from her forehead, the same shade her mother once had. "Sweetheart, any teacher would be lucky to have you in their class." The hallway smelled of lemon-scented cleaner and the faint sweetness of crayons. Somewhere in the distance, a piano played softly, probably coming from the music room. Arthur stood up, taking Emma's hand as they approached room 12B. The wooden door was slightly ajar, with warm light spilling into the dimly lit corridor. He'd rehearsed this routine hundreds of times in his mind since his wife passed away 2 years ago. Single fatherhood had become his identity, the early mornings, the packed lunches, the bedtime stories. He'd built a fortress around his heart, brick by brick, convincing himself that Emma was enough. That work was enough, that surviving was the same as living. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared him for what waited behind that door. Arthur pushed it open, the hinges releasing a soft creak that seemed to echo inside his chest. The room was bright, with sunlight streaming through large windows overlooking the playground. Desks arranged in neat clusters, a bookshelf overflowing with colorful books, the alphabet dancing across the wall in cheerful letters. And there, standing by the desk with a stack of papers in her hands, was a ghost from his past. Lynn. Time didn't stop. It shattered. Every carefully constructed wall around Arthur's heart crumbled in an instant. The air left his lungs as if he'd been punched. His hand reflexively tightened around Emma's, though he barely registered the movement. She wore a simple cream-colored blouse tucked into dark pants. Her hair, that same rich reddish brown he'd once run his fingers through, was pulled back in a loose bun, slightly disheveled. A few rebellious strands framed her face. She had wire-rimmed glasses now perched delicately on her nose, but those eyes, God, those eyes were exactly the same, brown with golden flecks, deep, penetrating. The kind of eyes that once looked at him like he was the only person in the world. Her scent hit him like a wave, jasmine and vanilla painfully familiar. His body remembered before his mind could process. Every nerve ending came alive with memory, her laugh, her touch, the way she used to whisper his name in the dark. Lynn's gaze lifted from the papers. Their eyes met. The world tilted on its axis. He saw her freeze, the papers slipping slightly in her hands. Her lips parted, those lips he'd kissed under 1,000 stars. And for a fraction of a second, he saw everything flash across her face. Recognition, shock, something deeper, more dangerous, something that looked like longing. The silence stretched between them, thick and electric. It couldn't have been more than 3 seconds, but Arthur felt each heartbeat like thunder in his chest. His throat tightened, his palms grew damp. Emma tugged at his hand. "Daddy?" The spell broke. Lynn blinked, straightening her posture. A professional mask slid into place, but Arthur had seen beneath it. He'd seen the tremor in her hands, the slight catch in her breath. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady, but with an undercurrent he recognized. It was the same voice that once told him she loved him, the same voice that said goodbye without warning. Arthur's mouth was dry. He tried to form words, but they stuck in his throat. Finally, barely above a whisper, he managed, "Lynn." Her name felt both foreign and familiar on his tongue, like coming home to a house that no longer belongs to you. Her eyes flickered, just for a moment, with something raw and unguarded. Then she recovered, extending her hand in a gesture of formal politeness that seemed absurd given their history. "Mr. Collins, I presume?" Her voice remained controlled, but he heard it, the slight tremor hidden beneath the professional veneer. He looked at her outstretched hand, that hand. He'd held it while they watched sunsets, felt it trace patterns on his chest in the quiet hours before dawn, and now she was offering it, as if they were strangers. Arthur took her hand. The contact sent electricity racing up his arm. Her skin was soft, warm. Her fingers fit into his palm as if they'd been designed to be there. For one suspended moment, neither let go. Their hands remained joined a fraction too long, the pressure slightly too firm to be merely cordial. He felt her pulse quicken against his fingertips. "Yes," he finally managed, his voice rougher than he'd intended. "Arthur, and this is Emma, my daughter." Lynn's gaze dropped to the little girl, and Arthur watched something tender bloom in her features, genuine warmth that momentarily displaced the tension humming between the two adults. "Hello, Emma," Lynn said, crouching down to the child's eye level. "I'm Miss Parker. I'm going to be your teacher this year." Parker, not her maiden name. Had she gotten married? The thought sent an unexpected stab of something dark and possessive through Arthur's chest. Emma, oblivious to the seismic shift occurring around her, smiled shyly. "You're very pretty." Lynn laughed, a sound that pierced straight through Arthur's carefully maintained defenses. "Thank you, sweetheart. That's very kind of you to say." She stood up, and Arthur found himself cataloguing every detail. The way she moved, graceful, deliberate. The slight nervous habit she still had of tucking hair behind her ear, even when there was no hair to tuck. The small scar on her left wrist from when they went hiking and she slipped on wet rocks. He knew this woman. Every curve, every gesture, every breath. And yet, she was a complete stranger. "Emma, why don't you pick a desk?" Lynn suggested gently. "Anywhere you'd like to sit." As Emma ran off to explore, Arthur and Lynn stood a few feet apart. The room suddenly felt too small, too warm, too full of ghosts and memories and all the words they never said. "You're a teacher now," Arthur said, more to fill the silence than anything else. "I am." Her fingers twisted together, another nervous tell he remembered. "And you have a daughter. My wife passed away 2 years ago." He didn't know why he said it. Maybe to make it clear he was available. Maybe to hurt her the way she'd hurt him. Maybe simply because it was the truth, raw and unavoidable. Something passed across her face, genuine pain. "Arthur, I'm so sorry. I didn't..." "No," he cut her off gently. "You couldn't have known." Silence fell again, heavy with years of distance and unspoken regrets. Emma came running back, her childish energy breaking the tension momentarily. "Daddy, I picked that desk by the window." Arthur forced a smile, stroking her hair. "Perfect, sweetheart." He needed to leave, needed air, needed to process the fact that the woman who vanished from his life without explanation was now. Arthur could barely focus on work that day. Sitting at his desk in the architecture firm, his eyes fixed on the computer screen, the architectural plans looked like meaningless lines dancing before him. His fingers drummed nervously on the keyboard, but no words came out, no sketches, nothing but Lynn's face burning in his mind like a permanent brand. Those eyes, he found himself replaying every second of the encounter, the way she'd frozen when she saw him, the almost imperceptible tremor in her fingers when she extended her hand, the caught breath for a fraction of a second when their palms touched. He hadn't imagined it. It had happened. The aroma of coffee growing cold in the mug beside his mouse brought him back to reality for an instant. The office was quiet, just the low hum of the air conditioning and the occasional click of keyboards around him, but in Arthur's mind, it was pure noise, memories screaming, demanding attention. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes, and there she was again. Lynn at 22, lying in a field of wildflowers, The afternoon sun, filtering through strands of brown hair, spread across the grass. Her light summer dress clinging to her body in the warm breeze. Her smile as she pulled him close, her lips meeting his with a sweetness that hurt in its intensity. "Promise you'll never leave me?" she'd whispered against his mouth, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I promise," he'd answered without hesitation. "You're mine, Lynn. Forever." But she was the one who left. Arthur opened his eyes abruptly, his jaw tight. The pain was still there even after all these years, a wound that never fully healed. He'd tried to move on. He met Sarah, a good and kind woman who loved him with everything she had. He married her, built a life, had Emma. And yet in some dark corner of his heart, Lynn had never really left. He pulled open the desk drawer, his fingers hesitating over the yellowed envelope hidden beneath old papers. He knew it was there, he'd always known. Never had the courage to throw it away, even knowing he should. With a heavy sigh, he took out the envelope and opened it carefully. The paper was worn at the folds, read and reread hundreds of times over the years. Lynn's cursive handwriting was still clear, each word a silent knife. "Arthur, forgive me for leaving like this. I can't explain now, but I have to go. My parents, there was an accident. My brother needs me. I can't drag you into this. You deserve more than a life of responsibilities that aren't yours. I love you, I'll always love you, but sometimes love isn't enough. Please don't look for me. Lynn." He ran his thumb over her signature, feeling the slight depression of the ink on the paper. It had been so abrupt, so final. A goodbye kiss on his forehead on a Friday night, and by the following Monday, she was gone. Phone disconnected, apartment empty, friends with no answers. He looked for her, of course, for months. But Lynn had disappeared like smoke, and now there she was, smiling at his daughter in a sunny classroom. Arthur put the letter back, closing the drawer harder than he'd intended. The sound echoed through the quiet office, making a few co-workers look up. He pretended not to notice, turning back to face the empty screen, but his mind was already far away again. Meanwhile, a few miles away, Lynn Parker closed the door of the empty classroom and leaned against it, her eyes closed, her heart beating so fast it hurt. Arthur. She'd imagined this moment thousands of times over the years, what she'd say, how she'd react. She'd rehearsed apologies, explanations, pleas for forgiveness, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared her for the reality of seeing him again. He was older, of course, fine lines around his eyes that weren't there before. His hair slightly grey at the temples, but those deep blue eyes, they were still the same, penetrating, honest, capable of truly seeing her, even when she tried to hide. And that touch. Lynn looked at her own hand, still feeling the warmth of his fingers wrapping around hers. Her skin tingled, as if electricity still ran through every nerve ending. She clenched her fingers, trying to hold on to the sensation, knowing it was wrong, but unable to resist. She moved away from the door, walking to the window overlooking the playground. Children were playing outside, high-pitched laughter, happy shouts, the sound of feet running on gravel. But everything seemed muffled, distant, as if she were submerged. Emma, his daughter. Lynn felt her chest tighten with a strange mixture of tenderness and something darker. Jealousy, regret. She wasn't quite sure. The girl was beautiful, honey-colored hair, bright eyes, a smile that lit up the room. And there was something in the way Arthur looked at her, so full of pure and protective love, that made Lynn's heart ache. She could have had this, could have been the mother of his children, could have woken up beside him every morning, felt his arms around her, built a life together. But she'd chosen to leave. Tears burned, but she blinked them away. She couldn't cry now. Not here. She had a profession to maintain, boundaries to respect. And yet, the way he'd said her name as Lynn, with that husky voice, laden with years of longing and pain, it had been like a punch to the gut. She turned from the window, pulling her phone from her bag. Her fingers hesitated over the screen. Should she call someone? Her sister, her therapist. She needed to talk to someone about this or she'd go crazy. But what would she say? I ran into the man I loved more than life itself and I still feel everything? His body still makes me tremble with a simple touch. I spent 7 years trying to forget him, and it took 3 seconds for it all to come back. Lynn dropped the phone back in her bag, pressing her palms against her eyes. She needed to pull herself together. She needed to be professional. Emma was just another student. Arthur was just another parent. But who was she trying to fool? That night, Arthur put Emma to bed, reading her favorite story for the 3rd consecutive time. His voice came out automatically, but his mind was miles away. When he finally saw her fall asleep, he kissed her soft forehead and left the room quietly. The house was too quiet, too empty. Every room echoed with memories of Sarah, but tonight, for the first time in a long time, it wasn't his dead wife's face that haunted him. It was Lynn. He poured himself a whiskey, the amber liquid glowing under the dim kitchen light. The taste was bitter, burning his throat, but welcome. He needed something to anchor him, to remind him he was real, that he was here, now, not trapped in the past. But his feet betrayed him, taking him to the bedroom closet. There, in a dusty shoebox in the highest corner, were the mementos he could never throw away: photos, movie tickets, a scarf that still faintly smelled of jasmine, and at the bottom, a faded photo of the two of them. Arthur held it up to the light. Lynn was in his arms, her head thrown back in laughter, her eyes closed with such joy. He looked at her with an expression that needed no caption, pure, undeniable, eternal love. He ran his thumb over her face in the photo. "Why did you come back?" he whispered into the void. "Why now?" But the universe had no answers. Only silence, and the bitter taste of whiskey, and the growing certainty that seeing Lynn every day, smiling at his daughter, would be the sweet torture he didn't know if he could endure, or if he wanted to resist. The following days both dragged and flew by. Arthur found himself inventing excuses to take Emma to school personally every morning, even when work demanded he be at the office early. He told himself it was for his daughter's sake, to make sure she adjusted well, that she felt safe. But the truth burned in his chest like live coals. He needed to see Lynn. On Wednesday of that week, he arrived a few minutes early. The school hallway smelled of morning cleaning and the comforting aroma of pancakes from the cafeteria. Emma bounced beside him, her backpack thumping rhythmically against her small back, chattering about how Miss Parker was the best teacher in the whole entire world. "She knows all the stories, Daddy, and yesterday she drew a unicorn that looked real, and she has a smile that shines." Every word was a sweet stab. Lynn had always had that gift, making people fall in love with her effortlessly. When they reached the door to room 12B, Arthur felt his heart race. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself, but it was useless. The door was open, and there she was. Lynn stood beside the whiteboard, writing out the day's schedule with colored markers. She wore a simple navy blue dress that gently hugged her silhouette, and her hair was down today, reddish-brown waves falling over her shoulders. The morning light came through the window, creating a golden halo around her. She was beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Arthur stood frozen in the doorway, unable to look away. He watched the fluid movement of her arm as she wrote, the delicate curve of her neck, the way she lightly bit her lower lip when concentrating, a habit he knew so well. As if feeling the weight of his gaze, Lynn turned. Their eyes met, and again that impossible electricity filled the air. The world around them blurred. The noise of other children in the hallway disappeared. There were only the two of them, trapped in that suspended moment, where everything was possible and nothing was allowed. A slow, soft smile curved her lips. "Good morning, Mr. Collins." The formality hurt, but there was something beneath it, a hidden intimacy in the undertones, in the slightly lower tone of voice, in the way her eyes lingered a second too long on his. "Good morning, Miss Parker," he replied, his voice coming out rougher than he'd intended. Emma had already run inside, tossing her backpack on her chair and joining her classmates. Arthur knew he should leave. Turn around. Go. But his feet were glued to the floor. Lynn took a step toward him, then another. The distance between them shrank. He could smell her perfume now, jasmine and something floral, mixed with the soft aroma of coffee. "She's adjusting well," Lynn said softly. "Emma is special. She really likes you." The words came out before he could filter them. "She won't stop talking about Miss Parker." Something gleamed in her eyes, pleasure, tenderness, and something deeper he couldn't decipher. "She reminds me of someone," Lynn murmured, her eyes still fixed on his. "Curious, brave, with a smile that lights up everything around her." Arthur swallowed hard. Was she talking about Emma? Or him, from years ago? The silence stretched, heavy and dense. He wanted to say so many things. He wanted to ask why she'd left. He wanted to yell. He wanted to kiss her. He wanted... "I need to go," he said finally, taking a step back before he did something stupid. "Of course." Her voice was almost a sigh. But as he turned to leave, her fingers lightly touched his wrist, just a brush, contact lasting less than a second. But it was enough to send an electric current straight to his core. Arthur froze, his eyes dropping to where her skin had touched his. When he looked up, Lynn's eyes were wide, as if she herself was surprised by her own gesture. "Sorry, She started but didn't finish. He held her gaze for another endless moment, then nodded slightly and left before he completely lost control. On Friday, it rained. Arthur arrived soaked, having forgotten his umbrella in the car. Emma laughed at his appearance, his wet hair stuck to his forehead, his dress shirt clinging to his chest. He rushed her down the hallway, both of them laughing as they left trails of water on the floor. When they entered the classroom, Lynn looked up and her eyes widened. For a fraction of a second, Arthur saw her gaze travel down, from his wet face across his broad shoulders outlined by the damp shirt, to his chest. She looked away quickly, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. "Someone forgot to check the weather forecast," she said, but there was a playful smile on her lips. "Someone was distracted," Arthur replied, and immediately regretted the accidental honesty. Her eyes returned to him, and this time they didn't look away. There was a question there, a silent provocation. Distracted by what? He didn't need to answer. She knew. Emma ran off to play, and Lynn approached, pulling a small towel from the cabinet. "You're going to catch a cold." She extended the towel, and when he took it, their fingers touched again. This time neither pulled away immediately. The contact lasted 1, 2, 3 seconds. His thumb lightly brushed the back of her hand. An accident? No. Lynn caught her breath, her lips parting. Arthur saw the pulse quicken at the base of her neck, the small telltale sign that she felt it all too. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice low and too intimate for the setting. "You're welcome," she whispered back. They were still too close. Anyone who walked into the room would see, but in that moment neither of them cared. Arthur leaned in, just a fraction, an almost imperceptible movement. He saw her eyes widen slightly, her lips part a bit more, and then the bell rang. Reality returned like a bucket of cold water. Children started running in. The moment shattered. Arthur stepped back, quickly running the towel through his hair. "I need to go." "Yes," Lynn agreed, but her voice was shaky. He left the room without looking back, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his temples. This was getting dangerous. Each encounter added another layer of desire, another rekindled memory, another reason he couldn't get her out of his head. Over the weekend, Arthur took Emma to the park. They were at the swings when he heard a familiar voice. "Hi, Emma." He turned and there was Lynn, wearing jeans and a light white blouse, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked younger like this, more relaxed, more like the girl he'd loved. "Miss Parker," Emma shouted, running to hug her. Lynn laughed, picking the girl up and spinning her around. When she set her back down, her eyes met Arthur's. "What a coincidence," she said, but there was something mischievous in her smile. "Coincidence," he echoed, not believing it for a second. Emma pulled Lynn's hand. "Come play with us." And so, without planning, without formal invitation, Lynn joined them. They pushed Emma on the swing together, their hands occasionally touching on the chain. They chased her at the slide, their shoulders brushing. They sat on the bench to rest, and Arthur felt the warmth of her body beside his, even without touching. "She's incredible," Lynn said softly, watching Emma play. "She's everything to me." Lynn looked at him, and there was so much tenderness in that look it hurt. "You're a wonderful father, Arthur." His name on her lips, without the formal Mr. Collins, made something tighten in his chest. "You disappeared," he said suddenly, the words coming out unfiltered, without a real explanation, without saying goodbye. She stiffened beside him, her eyes falling to her hands folded in her lap. "I know, and I'm sorry. More than you can imagine." "Why, Lynn? Why did you leave?" She was silent for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a whisper so low he almost didn't hear, "Because I was scared. Scared you'd see me as a burden. Scared of dragging you into the mess of my life. Scared of losing you in the most painful way." Arthur turned to her completely. The following week brought a different kind of restlessness. Arthur found himself constantly checking the clock, counting the minutes until he could pick up Emma. Each encounter with Lynn at school was brief, professional on the surface, but loaded with an underground tension that threatened to explode at any moment. The glances lasted a second too long. The smiles had hidden meanings. Words were chosen carefully, but what went unsaid screamed louder. On Thursday afternoon, Arthur stood outside the classroom, waiting for Emma to finish putting away her things. Lynn was organizing papers at her desk, but he knew she was aware of his every movement, just as he tracked her every breath. Finally, she looked up. Their eyes met, and Arthur decided to take a chance. "Can I take you out for coffee?" The words came out before courage could abandon him. Lynn froze, her pen suspended in midair. For an endless moment, he thought she'd refuse. That she'd say something about professional boundaries, about how it wouldn't be appropriate. But then she put the pen back on the desk, slowly, deliberately. "When?" Her voice was soft, almost cautious. "Saturday. After lunch?" Arthur's heart was beating so hard he was certain she could hear it. Lynn bit her lower lip, that nervous gesture he knew so well. "Where? Do you remember Café Madeleine?" Her eyes widened slightly. Of course she remembered. It was their place, the little French cafe near campus, where they spent hours talking, laughing, dreaming about the future, where he'd kissed her for the first time in a hidden corner under soft lights. "It still exists?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "It still exists." The silence stretched between them, loaded with memories and possibilities. "Okay," Lynn finally agreed. Saturday, 2:00. Saturday arrived wrapped in morning fog and an anxiety Arthur hadn't felt in years. He changed clothes 3 times before settling on a light blue shirt and dark jeans. Nothing too formal, but not careless either. He left Emma with Sarah's mother, who loved spending time with her granddaughter, and drove to the cafe with his hands sweating on the steering wheel. Café Madeleine sat on a quiet corner, with delicate iron tables on the sidewalk and large windows that let you see the cozy interior. The walls were exposed brick, decorated with black and white photographs of Paris. The aroma of freshly ground coffee and warm croissants escaped through the half-open door. Arthur arrived 10 minutes early. He sat at a table in the back, the same table where they used to sit years ago, and ordered a black coffee while he waited. Every minute felt like an hour. And then she appeared. Lynn walked through the door, and the entire world seemed to slow down. She wore a light wine-colored dress that accentuated every curve, her hair loose and falling in natural waves over her shoulders. A beige coat was folded over her arm. When her eyes found his, a shy and genuine smile lit up her face. Arthur stood up, nearly knocking over his cup in the process. "You came. Did you doubt I would?" There was a gentle tease in her voice as she approached. "I don't know. Maybe." He pulled out the chair for her, an old and automatic gesture. As she sat down, her scent, jasmine and something sweet, enveloped Arthur like a phantom embrace. "Thank you," she murmured, her eyes scanning the place. "Nothing's changed." "Some things remain," Arthur said, and they both knew he wasn't just talking about the cafe. The waitress came to take their order. Lynn ordered a cappuccino with cinnamon, exactly what she always ordered. Arthur smiled when he realized she noticed the recognition in his eyes. When they were alone again, silence settled in, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was loaded, waiting. "Why did you bring me here, Arthur?" Lynn finally asked, her hands wrapping around the warm cup as if she needed something to hold on to. "Because we need to talk, really talk." He leaned slightly forward. "Not as teacher and student's father, as us." She lowered her eyes, her long lashes casting delicate shadows on her cheeks. What if I don't know how to be us anymore? Then we figure it out together. Lynn raised her gaze, and there was something vulnerable there that made Arthur's chest tighten. You have every right to hate me. I know. He held her gaze without wavering. But I don't hate you. I never hated you. You should. Maybe. Arthur extended his hand across the table, palm up, in a silent offer. But that's not how it works, is it? Lynn looked at his hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, she placed hers on top of his. The contact was electric. Arthur's fingers closed gently around hers, his thumb tracing slow circles on the back of her hand. I missed this so much, she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. What? This. You. How easy it was to be by your side. Arthur squeezed her hand a little tighter. It wasn't easy when you left. I know. And I'm sorry. Every day. I'm sorry. Why didn't you come back? Why didn't you look for me? Lynn took a deep breath, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Because by the time I finally got my life back on track, years had passed. I thought you'd have moved on, that it would be selfish of me to reappear and stir everything up again. I got married, Arthur admitted softly. Sarah. She was good, kind. She loved me in a way I didn't deserve. Did you love her? Yes. He wouldn't lie about that. But not the same way. Never the same way. The tears finally escaped, sliding silently down Lynn's cheeks. Arthur released her hand only to grab a napkin, extending it. But instead of taking it, she held his wrist, her fingers cold against his warm skin. I never stopped, Arthur. Loving you. Not for a single day. The world seemed to stop. The noise of the cafe, the murmur of conversations, the hiss of the espresso machine, the clinking of cups, everything disappeared. There were only the two of them, hands intertwined on the table, hearts beating in painful synchrony. Lynn? His voice was hoarse, loaded with emotion. I know I have no right to say this. I know I left and hurt you and... Kiss me. She froze, her eyes wide. What? Arthur leaned even further across the table, his face inches from hers. Kiss me, Lynn. Here. Now. Because if you don't, I'm going to lose my mind. For a moment, she just looked at him, her lips parted, her breathing rapid. Then slowly she leaned in too. The kiss was gentle at first, just a brush of lips, a timid rediscovery. But then something broke. Arthur's hands went to her face, his fingers tangling in her silky hair. Her mouth opened under his, a low sigh escaping. They kissed like starving people, like lovers separated for an eternity, as if every second counted because it could be the last. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless, their foreheads touched, eyes closed, breaths mingling. That was... Lynn began but didn't finish. I know. They stayed like that for another moment, then sat back in their chairs, fingers still intertwined on the table. The coffee had gone cold, but neither of them cared. What now? Lynn asked softly. Arthur caressed the back of her hand with his thumb. Now we talk. Really talk. You tell me everything that happened. Why you left, where you've been. And I'll tell you about Sarah, about Emma, about how I survived without you. This is going to hurt. Probably. He smiled sadly. But it hurts more not knowing. Lynn nodded, wiping away tears with her free hand. Okay, but you first. Tell me about your wife. And so, amid cold coffees and untouched croissants, Arthur opened his heart. He talked about Sarah, about how she appeared when he was most lost, about the quiet marriage, the unexpected pregnancy, the joy of holding Emma for the first time. And then, his voice breaking, he talked about the cancer, about watching the woman who loved him waste away slowly, about holding her hand until her last breath. Lynn cried with him, her fingers squeezing his like an anchor. When it was her turn, she told him about her parents' accident, about taking custody of her troubled teenage brother, about the years struggling to pay bills and finish college at the same time, about the nights crying, wishing she could go back, but too proud to ask for help. I thought I was protecting you, she whispered. But really, I was just... The hours passed without them noticing. The cafe around them filled and emptied twice, customers coming and going while Arthur and Lynn remained at the same table, lost in conversations that needed to happen years ago. The waitress, a grey-haired woman who watched them with a knowing smile, brought fresh coffees without being asked, simply setting down the cups quietly and walking away. The afternoon light filtered through the windows, creating golden patterns on Lynn's face. Arthur couldn't stop looking at her. The way her eyes sparkled when she talked about her brother, who was now in engineering school. How her lips trembled slightly when she mentioned the hardest moments. How she still had that way of tilting her head when thinking, as if the entire world depended on that decision. "So you came back here," Arthur said softly, his thumb still tracing lazy circles on the back of her hand. "After everything." "Why?" Lynn looked at their intertwined hands on the table. The light caught the subtle glow of skin where they touched, creating a small island of warmth in the middle of the busy cafe. "Because this was always my place," she admitted. "No matter how much I tried to put down roots somewhere else, a part of me always stayed here. In the streets we knew. In the places we shared." She raised her eyes to his. "In you." Arthur felt his chest tighten. "Did you know I was still here?" "I looked you up." The confession came out in an embarrassed whisper. "On social media, once in a while. I saw that you'd gotten married. I saw the pictures of Emma when she was born. I saw when—" She swallowed hard. "I saw when Sarah passed away. I almost came to the funeral." "Why didn't you?" "Because it wasn't my place. I'd lost the right to be by your side a long time ago." A single tear slid down her cheek. "But I wanted to. God, how I wanted to be there for you." Arthur released her hand only to stand up and move to the chair beside her, closer, without the barrier of the table between them. When he sat down again, he gently pulled her into his arms. Lynn surrendered immediately, her face hidden in the curve of his neck, her shoulders trembling with silent sobs. "It's okay," he murmured against her hair, breathing in the jasmine scent that had haunted his dreams for years. "You're here now. I shouldn't be doing this," she whispered against his skin, but didn't pull away. "You're the parent of a student. I'm the teacher. There are rules, boundaries." "Rules," Arthur repeated, his hands moving up and down her back in comforting motions. "What if I don't care about the rules?" Lynn pulled back just enough to look him in the eyes. Her cheeks were wet, her eyes red, but she was still the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Arthur, tell me you don't feel this," he challenged softly, one hand rising to brush a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering on the delicate curve of her cheek. "Tell me that when we touch, you don't feel every cell in your body wake up. Tell me that at night, alone, you don't think about me the same way I think about you." Her breathing was uneven, her lips parted. "I can't say that." "Why?" "Because it would be a lie." Her voice was hoarse, loaded with equal parts desire and fear. "Every night, Arthur, every damn night." The low groan that escaped him was involuntary. His forehead met hers, their noses touching, breaths mingling in the tiny space between them. "You drive me crazy," he confessed, eyes closed, trying to control himself. "Since that first day, since I saw you in that classroom, it's like the last 7 years never happened. Like my body remembers exactly what it's like to have you close." "I know." Her fingers rose, tracing the line of his jaw with a reverence that made every muscle in Arthur's body tense. "My body remembers too. Remembers how you used to touch me, how you kissed me, how you made me feel like I was the only woman in the world." Arthur opened his eyes, meeting hers inches away. There was so much desire there, so much raw need, that he could barely breathe. "Lynn, if you don't ask me to stop right now, I'm going to kiss you. And it won't be a soft, respectful kiss like before. It'll be real. It'll be everything I'm feeling." She held his gaze without wavering. "Then don't stop." He didn't need more invitation. His lips found hers with an intensity that stole the breath from both of them. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't soft. It was pure hunger. Years of longing, of regret, of repressed desire, exploding in a single point of contact. Her mouth opened under his, her tongue meeting his in a duel so familiar it was frightening. Arthur's hands tangled in her hair, tilting her head to deepen the kiss. She moaned softly, and the sound traveled straight to every nerve ending in his body. Lynn's hands grabbed his shirt, pulling him closer, as if she couldn't get him close enough. Arthur could feel her heart beating against his chest, fast and erratic, matching his perfectly. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless, faces flushed, eyes dark with desire. "My God," Lynn whispered, her fingers still clutching his shirt. "Is it always like this?" Arthur asked, his voice hoarse. "Or is it just us?" "It's us." She rested her forehead on his chest, trying to catch her breath. "It's always been us." They stayed like that for long minutes, embraced in the corner of the cafe, oblivious to curious glances and knowing smiles from other customers. The world could have crumbled around them, and neither would have noticed. Finally, Arthur kissed the top of her head and whispered, "Come with me." Lynn raised her face, her eyes questioning. "Where?" "Anywhere. I just want more time with you." Without interruptions, without judgmental looks, just us. She hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Okay." Arthur left money on the table, much more than the bill, a silent gratitude for the waitress's patience, and guided Lynn out of the cafe. The afternoon was warm, the sun beginning to descend on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. They walked with no certain destination, hands intertwined, shoulders touching. Eventually, they reached a small park near the university, another place full of memories. There was a bench beneath an old oak tree, hidden from curious eyes. Arthur guided her there, and when they sat down, he immediately pulled her closer. Lynn nestled against his chest, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. "Tell me something," Arthur asked after a comfortable silence. "If you could go back in time, would you do it differently?" Lynn was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a whisper, "I don't know. Because if I had stayed, you never would have met Sarah, never would have had Emma. And she is perfect, Arthur. She's the best part of you." He tightened his embrace. "But what about us? And what we could have had? I think about it every day." She turned her face to look at him. "I think about what our children would be like, what our house would be like, what it would be like to wake up beside you every morning." "It still can be," he said, his voice firm despite his racing heart. "Arthur." "No." He held her chin gently, forcing her to maintain eye contact. "Don't tell me it's too late. Don't tell me we missed our chance, because I won't accept that. And Emma? Your daughter adores me as a teacher. How do you think she'll react if—" "Emma," he interrupted gently, "asks almost every night if Miss Parker can come have dinner with us. She already loves you, Lynn. And when she knows the truth, not now, but eventually, she'll understand." "The truth," Lynn repeated. "And what is the truth?" Arthur leaned in, his lips brushing her forehead, then her nose finally hovering over her mouth. "The truth is that I never stopped loving you. Not for a second. And now that I've found you again, I'm not letting you slip away. Even if it's complicated. Especially because it's complicated." Lynn smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that lit up her entire face. "You were always stubborn. And you were always mine." He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring every second, every sigh, every touch. When they pulled apart, night had already fallen completely. Stars were beginning to dot the dark sky. Arthur remembered another night years ago when they made love beneath these same stars, young and in love and convinced that nothing could separate them. Life had proven them wrong, but maybe, just maybe, it was also giving them a second chance. "Stay with me tonight," he whispered against her lips. Lynn caught her breath. "Arthur, not like that, not yet." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Just stay. Talk with me. Let me hold you while we fall asleep. Let me wake up and know this is real." She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll stay." And in that moment, beneath the stars that witnessed their first love, something old and precious began to bloom again. More mature, more aware of the risks, but no less powerful. The love that never really died. It just waited for the right moment to come back to life. The following weeks were a delicate dance between the permitted and the forbidden. Arthur and Lynn established an unspoken routine, casual encounters that seemed accidental but were carefully orchestrated. A quick coffee before school, a walk in the park on Sundays, text messages that started innocent and ended loaded with innuendo and barely contained desires. And Emma, beautiful and innocent Emma, became the unwitting bridge between them. "Daddy, can we invite Miss Parker for dinner?" she asked almost every night, her big, hopeful eyes shining under the lamplight. And every time, Arthur's heart skipped a beat. The first time Lynn came for dinner, Arthur spent the entire day in a state of nervousness he hadn't felt since adolescence. He cleaned the house 3 times, changed clothes 4 times, made lasagna, her favorite dish which he still remembered after all these years. When the doorbell rang at 7 in the evening, Emma ran to answer before Arthur could reach it. "Miss Parker!" the girl shouted, jumping with joy. Arthur reached the door in time to see Lynn crouch down to hug Emma, a bouquet of wildflowers in her hand. When she stood up and her eyes met his, the world seemed to slow down. She was wearing a simple emerald green dress that gently hugged her curves, her hair falling in loose waves over her shoulders. A light touch of makeup enhanced her eyes, and on her lips, a pink gloss that Arthur immediately wanted to taste. "Hi," she said softly, extending the flowers. "I brought these for you. They're beautiful." Arthur took the bouquet, his fingers intentionally brushing hers. The familiar electricity ran up his arm. "Please, come in." Dinner was simultaneously the sweetest torture and the most intense pleasure Arthur had ever experienced. Sitting at the table, Emma between them, chattering non-stop about school, her classmates, the drawings she'd made. Lynn laughed and responded, completely present. But from time to time her eyes strayed to Arthur, and when they looked at each other, the air between them practically vibrated. Under the table, Lynn's foot accidentally brushed against his. She started to pull away, but Arthur moved his leg, maintaining contact. He saw the exact moment her breath caught, her lips parting slightly. No one would notice. Emma continued talking, oblivious to the silent game happening inches from her. Arthur took a sip of wine, his eyes fixed on Lynn. He saw how she gripped her fork tighter, how her pulse visibly quickened at the delicate base of her neck. When Emma asked to show her new room, Lynn accepted with genuine enthusiasm. Arthur followed them, leaning against the doorframe as he watched Lynn admire Emma's drawings, praise the stuffed animals, sit on the floor to play with dolls. And something inside him broke. Not from pain, but from recognition. She fit there, perfectly, as if she'd always belonged in that place, that life, that family. When Emma finally fell asleep, later than normal, too excited from the visit, Arthur and Lynn were alone in the living room. The silence was dense, loaded with everything they couldn't say in front of the girl. "Coffee?" Arthur offered, his voice hoarse. "Please." He followed her to the kitchen, aware of her every movement, the way her hips swayed gently as she walked, how she sat on the counter with familiarity, legs crossed, the dress riding slightly above her knees. Arthur prepared the coffee, trying to concentrate, but his hands trembled slightly. When he turned to give her the cup, Lynn was watching every movement with an intensity that took the air from his lungs. "You're an incredible father," she said softly. "I do what I can." "No." She put the cup aside and slid off the counter, approaching slowly. "You're more than that. The way you look at her, how you really listen, how you make her feel loved and safe." Lynn stopped inches from him. "It's beautiful to see." Arthur swallowed hard. "Lynn, and it makes me want things," she continued, her voice low and intimate. "Things I shouldn't want." "Like what?" He couldn't avoid the question. She raised her hand, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw with a lightness that was almost painful. "Like being part of this life, this family." Her eyes met his. "You." Arthur's control was hanging by a thread. "You're already part of it. Not the way I want." He held her wrist, his thumb pressing gently where her pulse beat fast. "And what way do you want?" "Every way." The confession came out in a whisper. "I want to wake up beside you. I want to make breakfast for Emma. I want to kiss you whenever I want, not just when no one's looking. I want—" Arthur silenced her with a kiss. He couldn't help himself. Her lips tasted of wine and promises, soft and urgent at the same time. Her hands rose, tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. He pressed her against the counter, his body molded to hers, feeling every curve, every breath. Her mouth opened under his, and the low moan that escaped sent fire through Arthur's veins. His hands slid down her waist, over her hips, his fingertips brushing the exposed skin where the dress had ridden up. Lynn arched against him, her fingers moving from his hair to his shoulders, lightly scratching through his shirt. "Arthur," she gasped against his lips. "Emma might wake up." "I know." But he didn't stop, his mouth descending along her jaw, down her neck, finding the spot just below her ear that always made her tremble. Lynn moaned, her head falling back, giving him more access. "That's not fair." "What?" he whispered against her skin, his tongue tracing the line of her neck. "You remembering all my weak spots?" Arthur smiled against her skin. "I remember everything, Lynn. Every touch, every sigh, every way to make you beg." She trembled completely, her nails digging into his shoulders. "Stop, you need to stop." "Why?" But he was already pulling away, knowing she was right. "Because if you don't stop, I'm going to beg you to take me to your bedroom. And we can't. Not yet." Arthur pressed his forehead to hers, both breathless, trying to regain control. "You're killing me. Welcome to the club." She laughed low, the sound vibrating between them. They stayed like that for another moment. Then Arthur stepped away completely, putting safe distance between them. Lynn composed herself, smoothing her dress, running her fingers through her disheveled hair. "I should go," she said reluctantly. "Stay." The word came out before he could think. "Just a little longer." She bit her lip, clearly debating internally, then nodded. "Half an hour more." They returned to the living room, sitting on the couch, close, but not touching. It was delicious torture to be so near and not be able to touch her the way he wanted. "Tell me about your day," Arthur asked, genuinely interested. And Lynn talked about the students, about a new project she was developing, about how Emma was flourishing in class. Arthur listened to every word, but also observed every detail, the way she gestured when excited, how she bit her lip when thoughtful, how her eyes sparkled when she talked about something she loved. Eventually, without realizing how, they ended up closer, Arthur's arm around her shoulders, Lynn's head resting on his chest, fingers intertwined in their laps. "You know what's funny?" Lynn murmured sleepily. "What?" "This feels so right, so natural, like we were made to be like this." Arthur kissed the top of her head. "Because we were." She turned her face to look at him, and there was something so vulnerable in that look it made his heart ache. "Don't let me leave again." "Never." The promise was absolute. "This time you stay. Even if it's complicated?" "Especially because it's complicated." Lynn smiled, that smile that lit up the entire world. Then she leaned in and kissed him. Soft, sweet, full of silent promises. When she finally left, it was past midnight. Arthur stood at the door watching her car disappear around the corner, missing her before she was even completely gone. And that night, for the first time in years, he didn't dream about the past but about the future. A future where Lynn was beside him, where Emma had the mother she deserved, where they were finally a complete family. He woke up with Emma jumping on his bed, talking excitedly about how Miss Parker was the best person in the world. And Arthur smiled, because his daughter was absolutely right. Saturday dawned with a deceptively calm blue sky. Arthur had planned a picnic in the park with Emma, and after much hesitation invited Lynn. She accepted with an enthusiasm that made his heart race, and now at 10 in the morning, the three of them walked across the green lawn, carrying a wicker basket filled with sandwiches, fruit and homemade cookies that Lynn had insisted on making. The park was full of life, children running, dogs barking, couples walking hand in hand. Emma ran ahead, chasing butterflies, her crystalline laughter echoing through the air. Arthur and Lynn walked side by side, so close that their fingers occasionally brushed, sending electric sparks with each accidental touch. "Thanks for coming," Arthur said softly, his eyes fixed on her. Lynn smiled, her face lit by the sun. "I wouldn't miss this for anything." They found a perfect spot under an old tree, the shade offering relief from the growing heat. Lynn spread the checkered blanket on the ground, while Arthur took things out of the basket. Emma threw herself in the middle of the blanket, arms spread wide, looking at the leaves dancing above. "Look, Daddy, there are shapes in the clouds." Arthur lay down beside her, and Lynn did the same on Emma's other side. The three of them lay there, pointing out imaginary shapes in the sky. A dragon, a castle, a heart. "That one looks like Miss Parker," Emma declared, pointing to a particularly fluffy cloud. Lynn laughed. "How so?" "It's pretty and looks soft, just like you." Arthur saw Lynn blink rapidly, clearly moved. She reached out and stroked Emma's hair. "You're the sweetest thing, you know that? My daddy says that too." Lynn's gaze met Arthur's over Emma's head, and there was so much love in those eyes he could barely breathe. In that moment, lying under the blue sky, they looked like a real family. After eating, Emma asked to go to the nearby playground. Arthur and Lynn sat on the bench watching her play on the slide, but aware of each other with every fiber of their being. "She adores you," Arthur commented. "The feeling's mutual." Lynn leaned slightly, her shoulder touching his. "She's special, Arthur. Smart, kind, creative. You've done an incredible job. Sarah deserves credit too. She was..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "She was a wonderful mother." Lynn placed her hand on his. "I'm never going to try to take her place, you know that, right?" "I know, but Emma needs someone. And you?" He turned his hand, interlacing their fingers. "You're already starting to fill that space." She squeezed his hand, but said nothing. She didn't need to. That's when the sky began to darken. Arthur looked up, frowning. Heavy, dark clouds had appeared out of nowhere, covering the sun in a matter of minutes. The wind began to blow, lifting leaves and dust. "This wasn't in the forecast," Lynn murmured, worried. Emma ran over to them. "Daddy, is it going to rain?" Before he could answer, the first drops fell, big, heavy, cold. In seconds, it turned into a downpour. "Let's go," Arthur shouted above the noise of the rain, picking Emma up with one arm and grabbing Lynn's hand with the other. They ran through the park, abandoning the basket and blanket, the rain soaking them completely. Their clothes stuck to their bodies, hair plastered to their faces. Emma laughed, finding it all a great adventure, while Arthur and Lynn ran as fast as they could. "My apartment's close," Arthur shouted. 3 blocks. They ran through the wet streets, water splashing under their feet, the rain so intense they could barely see ahead. When they finally reached Arthur's building, they were completely drenched, water dripping from every piece of clothing. Arthur opened the door with trembling fingers, and the three of them practically fell inside. He closed the door behind them, and for a moment they just stood there dripping on the hardwood floor, breathless and laughing at the insanity of it all. "That was crazy," Emma shouted, still laughing. Arthur looked at Lynn. Her light cotton dress was completely plastered to her body, revealing every curve. Her dark hair was stuck to her face and neck, dripping water. She wasn't wearing a bra. He could see clearly through the wet fabric, and her eyes widened when she realized where his gaze had gone. She crossed her arms over her chest, her cheeks flushing furiously. "Sorry," Arthur said quickly, looking away, but the image was already burned into his mind. "Emma, sweetheart," Lynn said, her voice slightly high. "How about a hot shower before you catch a cold?" "Good idea." Arthur took off his soaked shoes and took Emma to the bathroom. "Let me help you, princess." 15 minutes later, Emma was clean, dry, and wearing warm pajamas. The busy day and the run in the rain had left her exhausted. Arthur took her to her room, and she fell asleep almost immediately, hugging her favorite teddy bear. He kissed her forehead gently and closed the door, then returned to the living room. Lynn stood near the window, watching the rain fall outside. She was still wet, her arms still crossed over her chest, trembling slightly. "Sorry," Arthur said. "Let me get you some dry clothes." She turned, and there was something different in her look. Vulnerability, desire, fear, all mixed together. "Arthur." He went to the bedroom and came back with a large t-shirt and sweatpants. "Here. The bathroom's right there. Towels are in the cabinet." Lynn took the clothes, her fingers brushing his. "Thank you." She disappeared into the bathroom, and Arthur took the opportunity to change clothes too, putting on dry jeans and a comfortable t-shirt. When he returned to the living room, Lynn was already there. She was wearing his t-shirt, which was huge on her, falling to mid-thigh, and the sweatpants rolled up several times at the waist. Her hair was damp, combed back, and her face free of makeup. She looked younger like this, more vulnerable. and absolutely stunning. "Looks better on you than on me," Arthur said, his voice hoarse. Lynn blushed. Liar. The rain continued beating hard against the windows. The room was bathed in cozy dimness, only the soft light from the kitchen illuminating the space. "Want coffee? Tea?" Arthur offered, needing something to do with his hands. "Tea would be great." He went to the kitchen, and she followed, leaning against the counter while he prepared the water. The silence between them was dense, loaded with everything that wasn't being said. When the kettle whistled, Arthur poured water into the mugs, his hands not as steady as he'd like. He passed a mug to Lynn, and when their fingers touched, the electricity was instantaneous. Their eyes met, held. "Arthur," she whispered, setting the mug aside. "We need to talk about this." "About what?" "About us. About what's happening." He set his own mug aside too, giving her his full attention. "What do you think is happening?" "I think," she took a deep breath, "I think we're falling for each other again. Fast and intensely. And I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of messing everything up. Of hurting Emma. Of hurting you." Her eyes shone with unshed tears. "Of hurting myself." Arthur took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "Lynn, look at me." She obeyed, her eyes large and vulnerable. "I'm not going to hurt you. And I'm not going to let you hurt me again." He held her face gently between his hands. "This thing? Between us? It's real. It's scary and complicated, and probably a terrible idea considering the circumstances. But it's real. I know," she whispered. "I feel it too." "Then stop fighting it. What if it doesn't work out? What if it does?" He leaned in, his forehead touching hers. "What if this is our second chance, the chance we didn't have 7 years ago?" A tear rolled down her cheek. Arthur wiped it away with his thumb. "I'm so scared," she confessed. "Me too, but I'm more scared of letting you go again." Lynn sobbed softly and then threw herself into his arms. Arthur held her tight, one hand at the back of her head, the other at her waist, as if he could keep her safe there forever. They stayed like that for long minutes, just holding each other, feeling their hearts beating against one another. When Lynn finally raised her face, her eyes were red but determined. "I don't want to be afraid anymore." "Then don't be." She rose on her tiptoes, and this time she was the one who initiated the kiss. It was different from the others. The kiss started soft, almost hesitant, but quickly transformed into something deeper, more urgent. Lynn's hands rose, tangling in Arthur's hair, pulling him closer as if she couldn't get him close enough. He groaned low against her lips, the sound reverberating between them, making every nerve in her body come alive. Arthur pressed her gently against the kitchen counter, his body molded to hers in a way that left no doubt about how much he wanted her. His hands slid down her waist, over her hips, slowly up her back, exploring every curve as if rediscovering a precious map he thought he'd lost forever. "Lynn," he whispered against her lips, his voice hoarse and loaded with need. "If you want to stop, you need to tell me now. Because if we continue, I won't be able to—" "Don't stop," she interrupted him, her eyes dark with desire. "Please, Arthur, don't stop." He studied her for a long moment, searching for any sign of hesitation. He found only certainty, only desire, only love. With a low groan, Arthur picked her up in his arms. She wrapped her legs around his waist instinctively, her arms around his neck, her face hidden in the curve of his shoulder. He carried her through the living room, stopping only to check that Emma's bedroom door was securely closed, then continued to his own room. The rain still beat against the windows, creating a constant rhythm that filled the silence. Arthur set her on her feet beside the bed, the soft light from the bedside lamp casting golden shadows over them. For a moment, they just stood there, looking at each other, breathing rapidly, hearts beating in sync. "You're so beautiful," Arthur murmured, his fingers tracing the line of her face with reverence. "You always were. But now you're even more." Lynn felt tears burn, but blinked them away. She didn't want to cry. Not now. She wanted to feel everything, every touch, every kiss, every second. Her hands went to the hem of his shirt, hesitant. He covered her hands with his. "Are you sure?" he asked one last time. "Absolutely." Arthur helped her remove his shirt, revealing his broad, defined chest. Lynn ran her hands over the warm skin, feeling the muscles contract under her touch. There were some scars that weren't there before, marks of life, of the time they'd spent apart. She traced them with her fingers, then with her lips, kissing each one as if she could heal the pain they'd caused. Arthur caught his breath, his hands going to her waist, pulling her closer. When her lips reached his heart, literally over his heart, he couldn't hold back anymore. He held her face and kissed her with an intensity that stole the breath from both of them. His tongue met hers in a duel so familiar, it was frightening, as if their bodies remembered exactly how to fit together. Arthur's hands slid under the shirt she was wearing, his shirt, his fingers exploring the soft skin of her back, rising slowly. Lynn arched against him, a sigh escaping her lips. "May I?" he asked against her mouth, his fingers at the hem of the shirt. "Yes," she gasped. He removed it slowly, revealing every inch of skin as if unwrapping the most precious gift. When the shirt fell to the floor, he stepped back just enough to look at her. Lynn stood there in only her panties, her damp hair falling over her shoulders, her skin covered in goosebumps, not from cold, but from anticipation. She was perfect. Absolutely perfect. "My God," Arthur whispered, reverent. Before she could feel self-conscious, he pulled her back into his arms, skin meeting skin, the heat between them becoming almost unbearable. His hands explored every curve, every valley, rediscovering the body he'd known so well years ago. Lynn let her head fall back when his mouth descended down her neck over her shoulders, going lower. She buried her fingers in his hair, holding him close, small moans escaping with each kiss, each touch of his tongue against sensitive skin. "Arthur," she gasped when his mouth found one breast, his tongue circling the already hardened peak. "Oh God." He smiled against her skin, satisfied with the reaction. He continued his exploration, paying equal attention to the other breast, while one hand slid down her stomach over her hips, stopping at the edge of her panties. "Okay," he murmured, raising his gaze to meet her eyes. Lynn nodded, unable to form words. He slid the panties down her legs, helping her step out of them completely. Now she was completely naked before him, vulnerable and beautiful and his. Arthur guided her gently to the bed, laying her down carefully. He stood for a moment, just watching, the way her hair spread on the pillow, how her skin glowed in the soft light, how her eyes followed him with a mixture of desire and love that made his chest tighten. "You're overdressed," Lynn said, her voice hoarse. He smiled, undressing quickly until he was only in boxers. When he joined her on the bed, the weight of his body on hers was both comforting and exciting. They kissed slowly, hands exploring, rediscovering. Arthur traced every curve, every line, memorizing again what he should never have forgotten. Lynn did the same, her nails lightly scratching his back, descending down his spine, making him groan against her mouth. "I want you so much," he confessed against her lips. "For so long. Every night I dreamed of this. Of you. Me too," she whispered. "I never stopped. I never could." Arthur kissed a trail down her neck, over her breasts, down her stomach. When he reached between her legs, Lynn caught her breath, her fingers gripping the sheets. "Relax," he murmured, his lips brushing the sensitive skin of her inner thigh. "Let me take care of you." And then his mouth found her center, and Lynn completely lost control. Her back arched off the bed, her fingers tangled in his hair, small cries of pleasure escaping without restraint. Arthur worked with expertise, remembering every touch that made her tremble, every movement that brought her closer to the edge. "Arthur, I can't," she gasped, her entire body tense. "Let go," he commanded against her skin. "I want to feel you." And she obeyed, completely shattering under his mouth, the orgasm sweeping through her in intense waves that left her trembling and breathless. When she finally came back to earth, Arthur was lying beside her, tracing lazy patterns on her stomach, watching her with a tenderness that made her eyes burn again. "You're incredible," she whispered. "We're not done yet," he replied, a mischievous smile on his lips. Lynn rolled on top of him, reversing positions, sitting on his hips. He was still in his boxers, and she could feel how much he wanted her, pressing against her. "My turn," she said, leaning down to kiss him. She explored his body the same way he'd explored hers, with reverence, with desire, with love. She kissed every scar, every line, every inch of skin. When she finally removed his boxers, freeing him completely, Arthur groaned low, his hips lifting involuntarily. Lynn wrapped her hand around him, her touch firm but gentle, and Arthur thought he'd lose his mind. It had been so long. So long since anyone, since she, had touched him like this. "Lynn," he warned, his voice strained. "If you keep doing that." She smiled, releasing him, and reached for the nightstand. Arthur understood immediately, opening the drawer and pulling out a condom. With hands that trembled only slightly, he put it on. Lynn positioned herself over him, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Two lovers that time had separated, but destiny had reunited. "I love you," she said, the words coming out unplanned but absolutely true. "I love you," he responded. "I always have. I always will." And then she descended, taking him completely, and they both moaned loudly at the sensation of finally being united again. They moved together in an old and familiar rhythm, their bodies remembering exactly how to dance. Slow at first, savoring every second, every sensation. Then faster, more urgent, chasing something that was right there, so close they could almost touch it. Arthur held her hips, guiding the movements, and Lynn leaned forward, her hands on the wall behind his head, her breasts swaying with each movement. He sat up, pulling her closer, changing the angle in a way that made her cry out softly. "Shh," he whispered, kissing her deeply. "Emma's sleeping." But it was hard to stay quiet when everything was so intense, so overwhelming. Lynn buried her face in his neck, muffling the sounds against his skin as the pleasure built and built. "I'm close," she gasped. "Arthur, I'm so close. Me too." He held her tighter, the movements becoming more erratic. "Come with me, love. Let me feel you." And then she fell, shattering around him, the orgasm even more intense than the first. Arthur followed seconds later, his entire body tense, his face buried in her hair, her name a reverent whisper on his lips. They stayed like that for long minutes, intertwined, breathing slowly, calming, hearts beating against each other. Arthur laid her gently on her back, never completely separating. Morning arrived soft and golden. The first rays of sun filtered through the curtains, casting warm light over the two intertwined bodies in bed. Arthur woke first, his eyes opening slowly, taking a moment to remember where he was. Then he felt it, the soft weight of Lynn nestled against him, her head resting on his chest, her arm thrown over his waist, their legs tangled together. For a moment, he just lay still, afraid that any movement would break the spell and make her disappear like smoke. But she was real, solid, warm. Her breathing was soft and rhythmic against his skin, each exhale tickling his ribs. Arthur kissed the top of her head, inhaling the scent of jasmine mixed with his own smell. His. She was his again. Lynn stirred, a small sigh escaping her lips as she awakened. Her eyes opened slowly, and when they met his, a soft, sleepy smile curved her mouth. "Good morning," she whispered, her voice hoarse from sleep. "Good morning, beautiful." Arthur traced the line of her face with his fingers. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in years." She stretched like a cat, her body rubbing against his in a way that sent heat straight to his groin. "You're very comfortable," he laughed softly, happy to serve as a pillow. They stayed like that for a few more minutes, just enjoying the closeness, fingers tracing lazy patterns on each other's skin. Then reality began to seep in, slowly but inevitably. Lynn pulled away slightly, sitting up in bed, pulling the sheet to cover her chest. The movement made Arthur's stomach sink. He recognized that look, the look of someone starting to question, to doubt. "Hey," he said softly, sitting up too. "Where'd you go?" "I'm right here," she replied, but didn't meet his eyes. "Lynn." She finally turned her face to him, and there was fear there. Raw vulnerability. "What we did last night was perfect," he finished firmly. "Was wrong." The words came out in a whisper. "Arthur, I'm your daughter's teacher. There are codes of ethics, professional rules. If anyone finds out, no one's going to find out yet. Not until we're ready." "And when will we be ready?" She ran her hands through her hair, clearly distressed. This is so complicated. And Emma, God, Arthur, what if this hurts Emma? He held her face between his hands, forcing her to look at him. Listen, I understand your fears. I understand that this is complicated and scary and probably not the most sensible thing to do considering the circumstances. Then why? Because I love you. The words were firm, absolute. Because I lost you once, and it almost destroyed me. Because my daughter already adores you. Because when I see you with her, I see the family I always wanted. The family I should have had. Tears slid down Lynn's cheeks. What if I mess everything up? What if I'm not good enough for her, for you? Impossible. Arthur wiped away the tears with his thumbs. You're already perfect for us. You don't understand. She sobbed. I ran away before. When things got hard, I ran. What if I do it again? What if I hurt you both? You won't. How can you be so sure? Because I know you, Lynn. I know your heart. And I know that the woman who woke up in my arms today isn't the scared girl from 7 years ago. You're stronger now, braver, and you're here not because it's easy, but because you chose to be. Lynn closed her eyes, more tears escaping. I'm so scared. Me too. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. But I'd rather be scared by your side than safe and alone. They stayed like that for long minutes, just holding each other, until a soft knock at the door made them separate quickly. Daddy, Emma's sleepy voice came from the other side. Are you awake? Arthur and Lynn looked at each other, eyes wide. He got up quickly, putting on sweatpants. Come in, princess, he called, then turned to Lynn and whispered, Stay here, just for a few minutes. She nodded, pulling the sheet more tightly around her body. Arthur opened the door just enough to slip through, closing it behind him. Emma stood in the hallway, rubbing her eyes, her teddy bear dragging on the floor. Good morning, sweetheart. Hungry? Uh-huh. She yawned. Where's Miss Parker? Arthur's heart skipped. What do you mean? Her car's still outside. Did she sleep here? Kids were frighteningly observant. The rain was really bad yesterday, Arthur explained carefully. She slept on the couch so she wouldn't have to drive in the storm. Technically not a lie, she had stayed because of the rain. Can I wake her up? How about we let her sleep a little longer? Let's make pancakes. When she wakes up, she can eat with us. Emma seemed satisfied with that, and Arthur led her to the kitchen. As he prepared the batter, his mind worked a mile a minute. They needed to talk about how to handle this, about how and when to tell Emma about the next steps. 15 minutes later, Lynn appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing the same clothes from yesterday, now dry, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. Her eyes met Arthur's immediately, a silent question in them. Miss Parker, Emma shouted, running to hug her. You slept here. Lynn picked her up, laughing. I did, the rain was really bad. Daddy's making pancakes. Want to eat with us? I'd love to. And so they sat down for breakfast, the three of them together, like a family. Arthur watched Lynn interact with Emma, the way she listened attentively to every nonsensical story, how she laughed at the childish jokes, how she naturally cut the pancake into small pieces without being asked. She fit perfectly. After breakfast, Emma went to watch cartoons in the living room. Arthur and Lynn stayed in the kitchen, washing dishes side by side in comfortable silence. About earlier, Lynn began quietly. Sorry for panicking. You don't need to apologize. Arthur dried his hands and turned to her. Your fears are valid. But you were right. She also turned, leaning against the sink. I'm not that girl anymore, and I don't want to run anymore. Are you sure? No, she smiled sadly. I'm still terrified, but I'm more terrified of the idea of losing you again. Arthur took a step forward, closing the distance. So what do? We take it slow. She raised her hand, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. We don't tell Emma yet, not until we're sure this is going to work. I don't want to confuse her or create expectations that might... He silenced her with a soft kiss. Okay, at your pace. No pressure. Thank you. She rested her forehead against his. And school. I'm going to request a transfer to another class. Or better yet, I'll talk to the principal about the pedagogical coordinator position that opened up. That way I won't be Emma's teacher anymore. You'd do that? I was already considering it anyway. But now, she smiled. Now I have an even better reason. Arthur kissed her again, more deeply this time. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling. So we're doing this? He asked. For real? We're doing this? Lynn nodded. But carefully, respectfully, for Emma, for us. For our family, Arthur added softly. We're not a family yet. No. He pulled her closer, his hands on her waist. Because it feels a lot like a family to me. Lynn looked toward the living room, where Emma laughed at the cartoon, then back to Arthur. You know what? You're right. It does. And in that moment, standing in the sunny kitchen, with the sound of Emma's laughter in the background, Lynn made the most important decision of her life. She was going to stay. No matter how scary it was, no matter how complicated it got, no matter how many rules she needed to navigate or how many fears she needed to face, she was going to stay. For Arthur, for Emma, for them. And for the first time in 7 years, the future didn't look scary. It looked full of possibilities. 6 months passed like a feverish dream, full of stolen moments, secret glances, and a love that grew stronger every day. Lynn had gotten the pedagogical coordinator position, which meant she was no longer Emma's teacher. The news was received with tears from the girl, until Lynn promised she'd still see her every day at school, and promised more dinners, more outings, more time together. What she didn't say, yet, was that she'd become an inseparable part of their lives. The encounters between Arthur and Lynn became more frequent, more daring. Quick lunches during work breaks that ended in passionate kisses in the car. Late-night phone calls that lasted hours, voices low and intimate, saying things that would make anyone blush. Weekends where Lynn stopped by to visit and ended up staying late, helping with dinner, putting Emma to bed, then losing herself in Arthur's arms as soon as the girl's eyes closed. They were careful, discreet, but anyone who saw them together would know immediately. Love practically glowed around them like a visible aura. And then, on a sunny Saturday morning, everything changed. Arthur woke with a strange feeling in his stomach, nervousness mixed with excitement. Today was the day. He'd planned everything carefully, rehearsed the words hundreds of times. But still, the fear of messing it all up kept him on the edge of panic. He grabbed the small object hidden in the nightstand drawer, turning it between his fingers. The morning light caught the shine of the solitary diamond, making it dance in tiny rainbows across the walls. Today, he whispered to himself. Today, I ask. The plan was simple. A picnic in the same park where everything had started again. Emma would be there, because she needed to be part of this. And when the right moment came, when the sun was beginning to set and painting the sky gold and pink, he would kneel and ask Lynn to marry him. Lynn arrived at noon, wearing a light yellow summer dress that made her eyes shine like liquid amber. Her hair was loose, waving softly over her shoulders, and she carried a basket full of cupcakes she'd made that morning. "Someone ordered sweets," she announced, coming through the door Arthur had left open. Emma squealed with joy, running to hug Lynn. "Oh, you came. Of course I came, sweetheart." Lynn picked her up, spinning her in the air. "Wouldn't miss our special day for anything." Her eyes met Arthur's over Emma's head, and there was so much love there he could barely breathe. How had he lived without this? How had he survived all those years without seeing her every day, without hearing her laugh, without feeling her touch? "Ready for the picnic?" he asked, his voice a bit hoarse. "Always." They arrived at the park an hour later, choosing the same spot under the old tree. But this time there was no threat of rain, just endless blue sky and golden sun filtering through the leaves. They spread the blanket, took food out of the basket. Emma ate voraciously, chattering non-stop about school, friends, the new book she was reading. Arthur and Lynn listened, smiling, occasionally exchanging loaded glances. After eating, Emma asked to go play at the nearby playground. Arthur nodded, and as soon as she ran off, he turned to Lynn. "I need to tell you something." She tilted her head, curious. "Sounds serious." "It is." He took her hand, interlacing their fingers. "Lynn, these last 6 months have been indescribable. You brought light back into my life. into Emma's life. You made us complete in a way I didn't even know was missing." Tears began to form in her eyes. "Arthur, let me finish." He smiled, nervous. "I know we haven't told Emma yet. Not officially, but she knows, Lynn. Maybe not with words, but she knows you're special, that you belong to us." "I belong to you," she agreed softly. "And I want to make it official, not just between us, but for the whole world." He took a deep breath. "But before I ask what I want to ask, I need to do something else first." Lynn frowned, confused. "What?" Arthur looked at the playground, where Emma swung happily. "Emma!" he called. "Come here for a second." The girl ran back, throwing herself on the blanket between them. "Yes, Daddy." Arthur looked at Lynn, then at his daughter. It was now or never. "Princess, I need to talk to you about something important." Emma straightened up, suddenly serious. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's great." He smiled, taking his daughter's hand. "But I want to ask you something. And I need you to be honest with me, okay?" "Okay. Do you like Lynn, Miss Parker?" Emma looked at Lynn, who was clearly trying not to cry, and nodded vigorously. "I like her a lot. She's the best." "And what would you think," Arthur continued carefully, "if she was more than just your friend? If she was part of our family?" Emma's eyes widened. Like a mommy." Arthur's heart almost stopped. He hadn't expected her to get there so quickly. Would that be good for you?" Emma was silent for a long moment, her face too serious for a 5-year-old. Then suddenly she threw herself into Lynn's arms. "I want that so much," she shouted. "I want you to be my mommy, Lynn." Lynn sobbed, hugging the girl tightly. "Oh, sweetheart, all my friends have mommies," Emma continued, her voice muffled against Lynn's shoulder. "And I wanted one too. I wanted you." Arthur felt his own tears burn. He'd never heard Emma talk like this before. Never knew she carried this silent wish. Lynn looked up at him, her face wet with tears but radiant with joy. "I would love to be your mommy, Lynn. More than anything in the world." "Then it's decided." Arthur wiped his own eyes. "But there's one more thing, Princess." He stood up, pulling the small velvet box from his pocket. Emma gasped, immediately recognizing what it was. She'd watched enough movies. "Lynn," Arthur began, his voice trembling slightly. "I lost you once. I'm not making the same mistake twice." He knelt there on the grass under the same tree where they'd started over. He opened the little box, revealing the diamond ring that sparkled in the sunlight. "Will you marry me? Will you be my wife, Emma's mother, and build a real family with me?" Lynn couldn't stop crying. She nodded vigorously, unable to form words. "I need to hear you say it," Arthur teased gently. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, perfect fit, and then pulled her into a kiss that made Emma laugh and shout, "Ew!" but with pure joy in her voice. When they pulled apart, the three of them hugged, a mess of laughter, tears, and overflowing love. "Are we a family now?" Emma asked. "We're a family now," Lynn confirmed, kissing the girl's forehead. "Forever." 3 months later, on an autumn Saturday with golden leaves falling like natural confetti, Lynn and Arthur got married in a small, intimate garden, surrounded by close friends and family. Emma was the flower girl, wearing a white dress with a pink ribbon and carrying petals she tossed with joyful abandon. Lynn was stunning in a simple white lace dress, her hair pulled back in loose curls, a bouquet of jasmine, naturally, in her hands. When Arthur saw her walk down the improvised aisle between the chairs, his heart almost exploded with emotion. She was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, not just physically, but the light radiating from her, the pure happiness written on her face, the way she looked at him as if he were the only man in the world. Emma stood beside him, holding the rings on a pink satin pillow, practically bouncing with excitement. When Lynn finally reached the altar, a simple wooden structure covered with wildflowers, Arthur took her hands, and for a moment they forgot there were other people there. There were only the two of them, finally making official what their hearts had known for years. "You're beautiful," he whispered. "You're crying," she teased softly, wiping away a tear that escaped. "I'm not," He lied, smiling. The officiant began the ceremony, but Arthur barely heard the words. He was too busy memorizing every detail, the way the sunlight filtered through her hair, how her eyes sparkled, how the smile never left her lips. When it was time for vows, Arthur went first. "Lynn," he began, his voice emotional but steady, "you left once and I thought I'd lost you forever. But fate, or maybe just pure stubborn love, brought us back to each other. You gave me a second chance to love, a second chance to be happy. And most importantly, you gave Emma something I could never give alone, a mother who loves her unconditionally." He squeezed her hands. "I promise to love you every day for the rest of my life. I promise never to let you go. I promise to build a family so full of love that nothing else will matter. You're mine, Lynn. You always were. You always will be." Lynn was openly crying now, and when it was her turn, she needed a moment to compose herself. "Arthur," she began, her voice breaking, "I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. I ran when I should have stayed. I let fear control me when I should have trusted in love. But life gave me a second chance. It gave me you. It gave me Emma. It gave me a family." She looked at Emma, who watched with huge, bright eyes. "I promise to be the best mother I can be. I promise never to run again. I promise that no matter how hard it gets, I'll stay and fight. Because you're worth every battle, every tear, every moment." She turned her eyes back to Arthur. "You're my home, my safe harbor, my one true love. And I promise to spend every day of the rest of my life showing you, showing both of you, how much you mean to me." There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. When the officiant finally said, "You may kiss the bride," Arthur didn't waste time. He pulled Lynn into his arms and kissed her with everything he had. Love, passion, promise, eternity. She melted against him, her hands rising to wrap around his neck, returning with equal intensity. Emma shouted, "Ew!" again, but then ran and hugged both their legs, making everyone laugh in the middle of the kiss. When they pulled apart, Arthur picked Emma up. "Now we're officially a family, princess." "Finally," Emma declared, making everyone burst into laughter. The reception was small but joyful. Live music, dancing, delicious food, and so much love in the air, it was almost tangible. Arthur and Lynn opened the dance, lost in each other, moving as if they'd danced together all their lives. "Happy?" he asked, his lips brushing her ear. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, nestling closer. Emma interrupted them, wanting to dance too, and so the three of them spun together, laughing and stumbling and being absolutely perfect. When night fell and guests began to leave, Arthur watched Lynn interacting with everyone, thanking, hugging, smiling. She was radiant, happy. His 6 months after the wedding. At an intimate dinner with close friends, Lynn sat beside Arthur, his hand resting casually on hers. The conversation flowed animatedly around the table, laughter filling the cozy atmosphere. Emma was playing on the carpet with the children of one of the couples, her crystalline laughter echoing through the room. Lynn watched the girl with a tender smile, her free hand resting instinctively on her stomach. Arthur noticed the gesture. His eyes widened slightly, his gaze dropping to where her hand rested. He leaned in, whispering in her ear, "Lynn?" She turned her face, her eyes shining with happy tears and a secret she could no longer keep. She nodded almost imperceptibly. His face lit up with pure joy. He held her hand tighter, kissing her softly on the temple, his heart overflowing. "Everyone," Lynn said softly, getting everyone's attention. "We have news to share." Arthur interlaced his fingers with hers. "We're growing our family." The friends erupted in shouts of joy and hugs. Emma looked up, confused. "What's happening?" Lynn called her over, and when the girl approached, she knelt to be at her level. "Emma, sweetheart, you're going to be a big sister." Emma's eyes widened. "A baby, for real?" "For real," Arthur confirmed, his voice emotional. Emma hugged Lynn's stomach tightly. "Hi, baby. I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to be the best big sister in the world." Lynn looked at Arthur over Emma's head, and what passed between them in that moment needed no words. It was gratitude. It was love. It was the absolute certainty that, After everything, every mistake, every tear, every moment of pain, they had finally found their way to each other. And they would never let go again. Sometimes, love doesn't end when someone leaves. It just waits, patient and silent, until destiny decides to rewrite the story. Arthur and Lynn learned that second chances aren't given. They're earned with courage, vulnerability, and the daily choice to stay, even when fear whispers to run. They discovered that a family isn't just blood but connection, that lost time can be recovered, that hearts have their own memory, and that, in the end, true love always finds its way back home. Because some souls were made to meet, to lose each other, and to find each other again, stronger, wiser, and ready to never let go again. And you? Do you believe in second chances? Do you believe that true love withstands time and distance? If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and become a member for early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, also click the Super Thanks button. Your gesture makes all the difference and helps us keep bringing stories that move the heart. Comment where you're listening to this story from. We'd love to know it reached you.